Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. How are you doing? I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing very well, thank you very much. And I hope you're keeping yourself lovely and warm and cosy with those freezing conditions out of there. So I hope you're drinking lots of hot chocolate and Horlicks and anything that you need to keep yourself lovely and warm. And many of you are telling me just how freezing you are. So you're not alone. But those of you who are warm, I hope that you are keeping yourself lovely and cool. So before we get started with tonight's story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, I was casually sitting at the gleaming oak wooden table in the kitchen of my Queen Anne-style home. With its steep roof, Queen Anne-style gables, asymmetrical front facade, and expansive wraparound porch with its decorative trim, situated outside of Seattle, in a glorious green leafy neighbourhood. I was looking out of the windows that overlooked beguiling views onto my backyard, where the cherry blossom tree was now bursting with pink blossoms, while shafts of pretty early morning spring sunshine peppered the kitchen with a twinkling light. I was proud of how beautiful the yard looked, with its viridescent green lawn, along with the beds of perennial flowers, intermingled with roses, fringed in by neat little lavender hedges, along with a scattering of fruit trees. My wife Hayley had been dead for over 5 years now. She had been very enchanted by our gorgeous home, along with the pretty views over the yard, the silvery pond with its glorious fountain of water that trailed down a rocky, precipitous incline to the rock pool below. I had maintained that backyard, keeping it in pristine, meticulous condition to honour her memory. My wife had loved that yard, most especially the rose garden. There wasn't a single day that went by when my heart did not ache for my beloved. How much I missed her with every fibre of my being. It was like my food was no longer salted. My life had become bland and tasteless. I never imagined how empty, futile, ineffectual, hollow and vacuous it would indeed become, without her ebullient presence in my life. It was always the little things I missed the most. The feel of my wife's warm companionship on the opposite side of the bed. The smell of fresh percolated coffee permeating the air first thing in the morning. Or the sound of my wife's pretty laughter tinkling in the breeze, rather like a wind chime. Then there were times I missed coming home to find my wife dancing around the kitchen floor, joyfully waving around her wooden spoon in her hands, gyrating her hips in time to the music, singing away happily to her favourite song on the radio, all the time while staring at something attentively that smelt delicious on the gas hob. She always claimed that singing over the food blessed a meal. There were so many little things we did together that made life so rich and precious, too many things to count. Holidays, camping trips, hikes, barbecues, fine dining, theatre, and sometimes the plainest things of all that are the most special. Now all they were just fleeting memories printed on the fabric of time, which I reviewed over and over again in my head, like a personal video recorder. I was terrified of losing touch with them. It might mean losing a part of my wife. I held on to those memories for dear life. They enabled me to feel close to her. Of course, another way I'd feel close to her was to visit her rather conspicuous, extravagant burial chamber every week at the cemetery. I'd bring a huge bouquet of flowers along with me, which I'd place in a large glass vase on the chamber. Then I'd talk to her. I'd probably gone overboard with the little monument I'd erected on her behalf, in the most beautiful, elite, esteemed part of the cemetery, under the shade of some large oak trees. I had allowed myself to be enticed by the funeral director, selling me this very lavish funeral package. I had gone for the most ostentatious monument upon which to remember my wife by. "Well, Mr. Perez, it is very good to finally meet you," the funeral director had said to me, an astute woman looking on my wife's death as a fragrant, sweet-smelling opportunity to deepen her already rather substantial pockets, as judging by the Cartier bracelets she was jangling on her wrists, she wasn't short of a bob or two. She studied me earnestly with an exaggerated look of concern in her beady brown eyes, heavily lined with black eyeliner and lashings of blue eyeshadow. You cherished your wife so very much in life, did you not? If you've got the money, it makes perfect sense to splash out on your wife's death. I always heartily recommend a mausoleum, which is a very charming granite building. It houses the intimate, treasured space of the burial chamber. It's really quite a wonderful place to be buried. She said this as if my deceased wife would be jumping up and down for joy on the other side about the prospect of being buried in a mausoleum. You can make sure there's a place for your personal chamber when you die as well, Mr. Perez, so you can be buried with her there. Imagine how wonderful that would be, united with your beloved wife, Mr. Perez, in death. Your body's lying to rest in such a theatrical, spectacular spot in the graveyard. When your wife sees how much you have lavished out on her financially, does it not show her what she meant to you in life? It seems pitiful to just give her a bog-standard stone, rather like the rest of the hoi polloi out there, if you know what I mean. I recommend you erect her something uniquely special with one of my designers who can help you design it. Something grandiose to honour her life. I know many of the gentlemen who have purchased mausoleums from me have been most pleased with the results, terribly happy. Why, one gentleman, Mr. Perez, was only saying to me the other day, when people see his mausoleum after he's died, they will say someone very important was buried here. I had nodded in agreement, but in reality I knew Haley hated being ostentatious. She thoroughly enjoyed living a good life, but being pretentious, frivolous and splashy with her money was never her kind of thing. I think the most extravagant thing we ever purchased in our lifetime together was in fact our Queen Anne home. I was a self-made millionaire. I could have splashed out on my wife with bountiful designer purses, expensive jewellery, but for Haley those kind of things held very little appeal. So in my heart I knew spending a fortune on a mausoleum would not have impressed her in the slightest. In truth, I really rather suspect she may have well found the whole thing rather vulgar, distasteful and salacious. But as I couldn't splash out on her any more, since she'd been taken away from me so fortuitously, why not give her a great memorial, then splash out on her in death? I remember as a young boy I got a job at a graveyard, helping manage the grounds there, with regular mowing, and of course digging the grave sites for the recently departed. I recall seeing the recently bereaved widowed men and women gathering around graves, so to speak, to their lost loved one, clasping bunches of flowers in their hands, with beleaguered, melancholy expressions on their grief-stricken faces, their lives so woefully pitiful and abjectly sad. That would never be me, I thought to myself. I'd never be reduced to bringing flowers to a grave site. After all, once you were dead, were you not? What was the point of visiting a stone memorial in a cemetery? How wrong I was. For the very sad, lonely, forsaken people that I had so pitied, I had now become. Ostensibly visiting my wife's mausoleum every week, bringing with me large bouquets of fragrant flowers to honour her memory, brought me a great measure of comfort, gave the long, lonely, drawn-out, desolate, sequestered days a measure of purpose. It would seem after Haley's unheralded death, I could discern the piteous, doleful expressions on our friends' faces. They smiled at me awkwardly when bumping into me on the high street, seemingly struggling to communicate with me. "Hello, Fred," they would say. "How are you?" "Fine," I would say. "Just fine." "Good. So glad to hear it," they would say, suddenly looking at their watches. "Oh, I'm in such a dreadful hurry. Sorry about that, Fred. I just remembered I left the rice on the hob at home. I simply must dash. So lovely to see you, Fred. All the best." I had noticed our old friends could not get away from me fast enough, as if now that I was widowed, I was somehow infected with a deadly contagious disease that they certainly didn't want to catch. How I hated those sorrowful looks they gave me. I suppose I can't blame them for feeling contrived. I mean, what did you say to someone recently bereaved? "How you doing?" When in reality you didn't want to hear the answer, in case they said, "Not good." It can make you become conspicuously aware of just how dreadfully alone and isolated you are in this world. When Haley had died, it had been so fortuitous, impetuous and unforeseen. She was not the one I thought would go first. I'd always perceived it would be the other way round, but fate can have a horrifying macabre way of twisting things the way you don't imagine that they will go. Out of the two of us, my wife was the one as fit as a fiddle, who took care of her health. But would you believe it, she was the one that tragically died in the bath of a stroke. Hayley had a sense of humour. I think she would have approved of dying in the bath, or in her rose garden, her two quintessential favourite tranquil places in the entire world. Needless to say, you never get over a haunting image of your wife's deceased body, most especially when it's an unexpected death like hers was. For me, the shock was much like a sharp knife severing my guts. Needless to say, all Hayley's clothes were still hanging in our walk-in wardrobe, 5 years on. I didn't have the heart to throw them out. I knew it was a job that needed doing. I needed to stop procrastinating, putting things off. I needed to bag them up and give them to charity, but I somehow couldn't. I couldn't get around to doing it. It felt that would be sabotage, truly letting go of her, which was something I just couldn't do. Until now, that is. For the first time in 5 years, there was a skip to my step, a hope in my heart, which was why I was smiling again. As I looked out of the backyard window, drinking my cup of coffee reflectively, even Hayley's scruffy-looking Airedale black and tan terrier Rufus had noticed a change in me. He was lying on the floor attentively, his dark eyes focused on me, his square-shaped head turning to the left and right. He was studying me curiously. He knew something had become different in me in recent weeks. I was lighter and brighter in my demeanour. The overcast heaviness in my daily routines had somehow lifted. He was right about that, of course. It was true. Over the last month, my life had profoundly changed. My bleak, bland, insipid, wishy-washy-looking future was gleaming with promise. Something I'd never dared to hope for. A second chance of love was flickering on the horizon of my life, dappling my heart with a brand new hope. Suddenly Rufus began to bark. He ran to the door, his tail wagging profusely as I heard the post being jerked through the slot in the door, landing on the flagstone floor of the entrance hall with a loud thud. I walked over to the post, picking it up in my hands, skimming through it briefly. Bills, oh no, more bills. Then I saw it, a pristine large white envelope with my name and address on it, written in the most exquisite curly italic writing in black ink. On the back of the envelope there was a stylized burgundy red wax seal that had been stamped with the initial A. I tore open the envelope. I stared at the very smart white card, with its long line of curly italic writing, done in the black fountain pen. Beautiful writing, reminiscent of another time, when people wrote with such style. I stared at the sentence that was written on the card, stumbling back into the kitchen. I felt as if someone had hit me with the back of a garden trowel, as my head began to spin. I became rather unsteady on my feet. I grabbed the pot of percolated coffee, pouring myself a mug, piling it high with sugar, reading the neat writing again and again. It read, "Don't marry her. You'll end up dead like the others. She's poison. From a concerned friend." I knew without a shadow of a doubt that this card was in reference to the woman I had met only a month ago. She was already talking about wedding bells. I was naturally not adverse to the idea of marrying again, although it seemed rather over the top for a man in his 70s like myself. Still, stranger things have happened. I mean, who wants to be alone for the rest of your life? I certainly didn't. I was finding it hard enough to get through every day. I knew that Hayley would never begrudge me a second chance of happiness. But this card had certainly put a spanner in the works. As somewhere deep in my gut, I knew things were too good to be true. Even before I'd read this card, there had been insidious signs that had stared at me brazenly in the face, rather like scintillating Christmas decorations that grab your attention, signs I conveniently chose to ignore. I was now beginning to wonder if I'd been set up by this woman, and I rather suspected I had. I reflected back to the first time I'd met Lily. I'd been shopping in the pet food place, ordering my usual brand of dog kibble, when out of the blue this attractive brunette, possibly in her late 50s, had come up to me, studying me curiously through long fake lashes with bright brown eyes. "Who are you buying the kibble for?" she'd asked me, standing behind me at the counter. "You're talking to me?" I'd asked, looking at her in surprise. "Of course, silly," she'd laughed. I don't see anyone else here, do you? No, I admitted. I don't. She smiled at me brightly, was openly flirtatious with me, which was rather a shock, as my days of being a handsome man are well and truly over. I only have to look in the mirror to know this is true. The ravages of time have not been kind to me. In truth, I look older than my 70 years. I look rather weathered and worn, like a well-used piece of furniture that has faded from the sun. So no, I don't look like I used to. As when I was younger, I don't mind saying that I was easy on the eye. But not so any more, I'm afraid. My one redeeming feature is I am rather slender. Over the years I haven't put on a stitch of weight, but I put that down to good genetics. But I am no oil painting, I can assure you of that. So this woman flirting with me seemed a little off-kilter. Not that I wasn't enjoying the attention, of course, as what lonely old man doesn't enjoy a little fuss from a glamorous lady? Do you have a dog? She asked me. Well, I wouldn't be buying dog food if I didn't, I had said. She had laughed a bright musical laugh, flashing her long fake eyelashes at me suggestively, playing with the pretty pendant on her breastbone. I have an Airedale. It belonged to my late wife. His name is Rufus. He's a very nice character, actually. Rather an agreeable temperament, I have to say. Oh, my God! You have an Airedale! Oh, I love Airedales! Please, can I come and visit your dog? I hope it's not presumptuous of me to ask you, but I just have a big passion for Airedales. Living in an apartment like I do, I don't get to keep a big dog. My name's Lily Peterson, by the way. And I'm Freddie Montague, I told her. At Lily's spontaneous serendipitous request, I'd been quite startled by her enthusiasm. It had been infectious, so I'd invited her over to tea. When she arrived at my home, let's just say she didn't give Rufus, my Airedale, a fleeting glance, which I thought was decidedly odd. I mean, she was here to see my Airedale, was she not? But she showed him as much interest as a horse would have if a chef offered him a braised piece of fillet steak instead of an apple. I should have seen the warning red flags blowing in the wind right then and there, but I didn't. This is Rufus, I had told her. Oh, he's lovely, she had said in an impassioned, insouciant, perfunctory voice. I noticed that her nose physically wrinkled up in disgust, as if in reality she was one of those people that secretly rather despise dogs. She promptly disregarded Rufus, who began to growl at her. I hasten to say he has never done before. His dislike towards Lily was instantaneous. Needless to say, Lily seduced me in a way that no woman has ever done so before, with a pronounced expertise that perhaps was more professional than personal. Let's just say the movie 9.5 Weeks would have done well to take some pointers from Lily, for she was full on in the bedroom department, which was rather overwhelming for a man like me, because let's just say I've never exactly been the wild, adventurous type. Frankly, it's too exhausting for me, especially at my age. And so began 4 weeks of wining and dining Lily at some of Seattle's most exclusive restaurants, places like the Pink Door, the Art of the Table, the Nest, and Ascen's Prime Steak and Sushi, all fabulously expensive restaurants. I'd also taken her shopping, bought her designer purses and clothes. Lily loved all things deluxe, fashionable, luxurious and posh. Oh, you are such a sweetheart, Freddie dear, she had said to me, kissing both sides of my cheeks affectionately. Aren't I such a lucky girl? She would say to the shop assistant behind the till. You are indeed, madam, the lady would say, smiling at her, handing her back a small designer carrier bag, with a big smile on her face. They don't make them like him any more, do they, Lily had said, winking at the sales assistant, and tottering off with a big swagger, like a cat who'd got the cream, and then some. When I went out for dinner with Lily, she smiled at me, layering me with a plethora of charm. One thing I always discerned without exception is that her smile never met her eyes. I began to secretly ponder if Lily was only interested in me for my deep pockets. But then I'd never revealed to her that I was a man of sizable means. But there were ways she could have found out. For indeed my Queen Anne home was of course an expedient asset. It was very bodaciously decorated to complement the historic integrity of the home, where no expense had been spared. However, the modest way that me and Haley had lived our lives never suggested for a single moment that we were affluent. However, these days there were, as I was saying, ways and means to find out whether someone was sitting on a hefty nest egg. But even the Queen Anne home on its own was worth a sizable amount of money. I asked myself that even if Lily was only interested in me for my money, was that such a bad thing? I'm sure hundreds of men had married women that were only attracted to their affluence, and they hadn't even batted an eyelid about it. I mean, if I married Lily, it would mean not being alone. As far as I was concerned, that was a big plus, but being played was not something that I could easily condone. I sensed in my gut that Lily was playing with me, which left a bitter taste in my mouth that I couldn't easily eradicate. Lily may have been attractive, but she was a woman with a rather hard face. She looked like a person who hadn't had life very easily. On a subconscious level, I think she was mad at the world about the unfairness of her lot, for she had admitted to me that she had come from an impoverished background, had been abused by her father when she was a young girl, so there was no doubt in my mind that she was damaged goods, had a vendetta with the world. I remember her saying, "I've had to work damned hard for anything I've ever wanted in my life." She'd said this with an angry edge to her voice. It got the hair on the back of my neck standing on edge, I don't mind admitting. I could see by the glamorous outfit she threw together, along with her heavily made-up face, literally suffocated by layers of thick makeup, that she was trying her best to be very glamorous. She was always preened within an inch of her life, with very scary, long, pink, perfectly manicured talons, regular trips to the salon for Botox and fillers, which made her forehead so fixed in place it looked as if it was made of stone, as well as frequent appointments with her stylist to touch up her grey roots, add some bonny, blonde, honey and crimson highlights to her hazelnut hair. Sometimes she looked a little like mutton dressed up as lamb, squeezing her way into tight leopard print dresses with low cleavages, or to gain maximum attention, of course, from an applauding, approving male audience. She was never disappointed. She did get the look she hankered for, so her laboured efforts to look fabulous were not unrewarded. It made me feel distinctly uncomfortable and uneasy to be with an attention-seeking woman that wanted to be admired by all and sundry, rather like a David Hockney painting on display at the Tate Gallery. I'm sure people were thinking, what is she doing with him? She could do so much better than land up with a 70-year-old man like him. I wasn't interested in Lily for her wanton advances, far from it, in fact, but she was company in my lonely life. I knew one thing without a shadow of a doubt, that my wife Hayley would not have approved of her one little bit. In truth, I'm not sure I liked her either, but I enjoyed not being alone. Having someone to take out to dinner was always pleasing. Only recently, Lily had actually laid on the pressure for us to get married, when I'd asked her to move in with me. "There is no point in your going back to your apartment every day," I'd said. "Why don't you just move in with me? Come on, you know it makes a lot of sense. Besides, it'd be awfully fun if you would." She had looked up at me through her brown eyes and giggled. "I'm not that kind of girl, Freddie. I won't move in with a man until he makes an honest woman out of me. I mean, what do they say? Why buy the cow when you get the milk for free?" It seemed rather strange for her to be saying that to me, because I'd been getting far too much milk for free recently, so much so that I was beginning to feel quite nauseous. I think I was lactose intolerant. You can have too much of a good thing, I can assure you of that. "You mean you want me to marry you?" I asked her, looking rather stunned. "Now he gets it," she said, winking at me. "Oh, by the way, I've seen a fabulous engagement ring at the jeweller's on Fifth Avenue. We need not have a fancy wedding, but why don't we fly over to Vegas, get married there at the Paradise Wedding Chapel? I'll buy a beautiful dress. We can stay at the Bellagio. Go on, it'll be absolutely fabulous." I had nodded in agreement, bought her a fabulously expensive diamond rock for her finger from an exclusive jewellery store on Fifth Avenue. But as the day to fly to Las Vegas loomed ever closer, something in my gut didn't feel right about getting married to this woman. I didn't love her, and I barely even liked her. Everything about her was in your face, over the top, and while I appreciated her company, tying the knot with her was just going a step too far for me. I knew that she was a fabulous companion, but she would never ever be the love of my life like Hayley had been. However, now that I was glancing at the beautifully written card, reading the ominous words again and again, "Don't marry her, or you'll end up dead like the others. She's poison, from a concerned friend," I knew that these words weren't just pie in the sky, nor someone trying to make my life miserable. These words were a sober, sincere warning from someone who knew Lily a whole lot better than I did. I mean, I'd been with Lily for only a month. I knew nothing about her at all. Things were moving way too fast. She had shown me her best face going forward, but I had seen sneaky glances at a darker side to her personality, hidden in the shadows that she managed to keep well hidden from me. Sometimes when she became inebriated, her words had grown rather careless. Her guard would slip. Then she would say things like, "You sad, pathetic old man. I'm only interested in you for your money. Why do you think I'm with you?" Of course, when she was sober, I'd confront her with her words. "Oh, don't be ridiculous," she'd say. "Of course I say anything when I'm drunk, but it means absolutely nothing at all." I wasn't so sure, for many a word of truth is spoken in jest while in the throes of a drunken frenzy. Of course I had tried to find out about Lily's past, but she was like a locked closet that refused to be opened when it came to that subject of discussion. "Oh, goodness gracious, sweetheart," she'd said, stroking my face affectionately with her long hands, unbuttoning the top button of my shirt. "You know, you do ask the most irrelevant questions that really aren't significant. So what if I have a past? So do you. But let's move on into the future, shall we? Let bygones be bygones, for goodness sake. I don't think we should dwell on our pasts. As for your late wife's closet, isn't it time you cleared up all that stuff out? Move forward into the future, Freddie, for goodness sake. And on the subject of your wife's closet, oh my goodness, she had no taste. Her clothes, oh, they're so beige, so utterly mundane, so old ladyish." "I'd rather you didn't talk about my late wife like that," I'd said. "Oh, who's getting so touchy?" she had teased. "Still got a soft spot for the old lady, have you?" she had cooed. "Oh, that's so sweet, Eddie. You're a sweet man. You really are." A day went by, and another one of those white envelopes in that black italic print arrived, once again stamped with a burgundy seal. I opened it to a note which read, "If you want to find out why you shouldn't marry Lily, I will fill you in on all the details. I'll meet you at the Mountain Lion Trail. I'll be wearing a red scarf. See you there at about 5 p.m. today. We'll go for a walk together. I will tell you everything. If you nod at me, I will know who you are." So there I was on the hiking trail, wearing a pair of white pants, a turtleneck green top, and a pair of Timberlake hiking boots, and off I went on my merry way. I decided not to take my Airedale Terrier along for the walk. I wasn't certain what to expect, or who it was that I would be meeting. I assumed it was a woman, whom had known Lily in her youth, had some inside information to tell me. I had a horrible feeling whatever I was going to learn about Lily, it wasn't going to be easy on the ears. I began to walk up the precipitous, steep mountain trail that was rugged and rocky, bespeckled with feathery ferns and a plethora of Spanish moss. The day was beginning to shed its light. The forest seemed to grow dimmer. Trickles of pearly light infused through the open canopy, while parts of the sky that I could see from through open spaces had grown into a kaleidoscope of resplendent orangey yellows and tangerine colours, while the sun began to set over the valley. There was not a solitary soul on the hiking trail, but that wasn't particularly surprising, for rain had been forecast. No one wanted to be caught up in the deluge. I had come prepared with my raincoat. I could smell the rich smell of the earth, the fragrant, sweet, butterscotchy-like scents of the ponderosa pine trees, and a very distinct scent of rain on the air. The towering viridescent green ponderosa pines, Douglas firs and spruce trees were clustered together in congenial groups, almost like a large sports stadium filled with hundreds of substantial-sized wizened giants. That was when I saw a man ahead of me on the trail, wearing a bright red scarf. He nodded at me. I gave him a return nod. He waited for me to catch up with him on the trail. "I'm so glad you came. In truth, I wasn't exactly sure you would. This is my absolute favourite trail. I thoroughly enjoy walking it at the end of a long day. In spring it's spectacular, with all those colourful spring flowers. The clusters of yellow daffodils I simply love." "I agree," I said. "It is lovely." "My name is Angus," he said, reaching out to shake my hand. His handshake was strong. "I could have asked you to meet me in a bar, I know, but I'm a very outdoorsy person. I find it a lot easier to talk when I'm walking. You see, what I'm going to tell you is not going to be pleasing to hear. I decided that anyone going out with the likes of Lily needs to know what she's all about. I want you to know what you're getting yourself involved with. I realised the man was a similar age to myself, in his 70s. I would say the ravages of time had been a whole lot kinder on him, as he had a full head of hair and seemed to be in remarkably good nick. I think he was one of those lucky, enviable men that, rather like full-bodied red wine, rather improves with age. "You're probably wondering who I am," he said. I was, rather. "What's your opinion of Lily?" he asked me. "Well, she's attractive. To be honest with you, she's not my type. She's very high maintenance, high energy, exceedingly demanding. And ruthless," Angus interjected. "That woman is ruthless. Has she asked you to go off and get married in Vegas, to book into the Bellagio or Waldorf Astoria by any chance?" "Oh, actually, yes. We're supposed to be getting married in 2 weeks' time." "Big mistake," said Angus. Big mistake. You don't want that woman to get her sharp claws into you. She'll eat you alive, I can assure you of that. Tell me, Freddie, are you by any chance a lonely, wealthy widower whose wife recently died? Did you happen to get your wife buried in a mausoleum?" I looked at Angus with a dumbfounded expression on my face. "Yes. How did you know about that?" "I confess to being a lonely widower. My wife died 5 years ago. Yes, I was persuaded by a funeral director to get my wife buried in a mausoleum. But I will tell you this, if my wife Haley were to see her resting place, she's likely to think it is rather tacky. She would have been much happier to have a simple gravestone. She would have preferred that quite a lot, actually. Let me guess. How did you meet Lily? Was it at the supermarket or the post office or the bank?" "No, it was at a pet shop." "Let me see. Did she somehow manage to invite herself over to your place? Then she seduced you within an inch of your life?" I flushed. "Something like that. She was rather full on, I admit." "That's Lily for you. Never doing anything in half measures." "How do you know Lily?" I asked. "I'm Lily's husband number 3. I gasped. "But I don't understand. She told me she'd never been married before." "Oh, well, she's been married 5 times, if you must know. You're about to be husband number 6. "I had no idea. How did you meet her?" "Well, like you, I was a bereaved widower. Lost my wife to a long drawn-out battle with breast cancer. Sucked the dear life out of me, it did. But I loved that woman with all my heart. Well, I went to the local cemetery. I was persuaded to get my wife buried in a mausoleum, because if you're a man of means, that's an appropriate thing to do. Well, let's just say that's what the funeral director informed me. Unbeknownst to me, this funeral director was in fact Lily's sister." "You're joking." "No, I'm not. I was to discover that Lily's sister was giving her sister the men's names who had the financial means to invest in a mausoleum for their wives' departure. Then Lily was forwarded their addresses and numbers by her own sister. I believe the 2 of them are in this together, looking to target lonely old men of means like you and me." "What do you mean?" "Well, all 4 men that Lily married are now dead. They died in very suspicious, dubious circumstances. Lily cleaned them out, of course. Once they were dead, she inherited all their financial wealth and assets. She's already a rich woman in her own right, looking to get substantially richer with husband number 6, which is you." "What do you mean they died in suspicious circumstances?" I asked. "Well, I think it was husband number 1 that was drowned in the bath with sleeping pills found in his bloodstream. Lily, of course, claimed he was suffering from insomnia, took the pills, fell fast asleep in the bath, subsequently drowning. Another husband was electrocuted in the kitchen. A dreadful accident with water and electricity when the fish tank suddenly collapsed. The other husband fell to his death from a high hill on a hiking trail. But Lily, of course, was nowhere to be found when it happened. Methinks that's all too convenient. The 4th husband, well, he was found dead in his car with a gunshot to the head. But Lily was away in Reno at the time. Awfully convenient. The police haven't been able to pin anything on her. But I've made it my business to warn any of her potential suitors of her nefarious intentions. Let's just say, bro, I believe you are living on borrowed time.
when you come back from your wedding in Vegas. Let's just say the clock is ticking for you. How come you didn't end up killed if all her other husbands died? I was one of the lucky ones. I happened to see that my wife's cell phone was left unlocked when she went for a shower. I discovered a whole lot of text messages between her and her sister discussing how she was going to finish me off. She came into the room with a towel around her head after her bath. When she saw me looking through her texts, her face drained of colour. She went awfully white. She grabbed her cell phone from me, smashed it into smithereens. I, of course, demanded a divorce instantly, phoning my lawyer, informing him that if I was to end up dead in nefarious, questionable circumstances, that Lily needed to be investigated forthwith. So let's just say she left me well alone, gave me my divorce, turned around to me and said, "You win some, you lose some, but I have to hand it to you, Angus, you're not as stupid as you look. It's a pity, really. I was looking forward to getting my hands on your fat bank account." I said to her, "Did you even love me?" She said to me, "Love? I've never loved anyone a day in my life. No, I don't love you." Then she stopped for a moment, as if considering my question. She looked at me and said, "Of course, there is someone I do love very much. That's me." She laughed and just sauntered off. I never saw her again. I don't know how long me and Angus engaged in conversation, but after a long walk we decided to sit down on the earthen floor and just talk. Let's just say we talked for a very long time, blindly oblivious to the marching time. I think we really hit it off, as if we'd been friends all our lives. Neither of us expected to develop such an unlikely male bonding, but we did. Angus had a torchlight with him, so we felt relatively confident about walking back in the dark, if we should need to, which was going to be the case this evening. Angus told me all about his life, how lonely he had become, how much he regretted he ever got together with Lily. He glanced briefly at his watch and said, "You're not going to believe the time, bro. It's 12 o'clock at night. You and I have not stopped talking." It had grown dark very quickly. The soft full moon permeated the canopy of the trees. Silvery shivers of light bespeckled the floor. For a long time the chorus of frogs and crickets that had serenaded the night became deathly still. Quietness swathed the entire woodgrove in carpets of silence, as everything became hauntingly still. So much so that for a while Angus and I almost became one with that silence. The only thing I can say is that I just had a sense that something was about to happen, rather like you were sitting at the theatre, waiting for the curtains to be flung open and some outrageous scene to grab your attention. It was like that for us. Then it happened, almost as if our anticipation and expectation had found its reward. We heard a sound of something very substantial moving through the trees. If we'd been in the heart of Africa, I would have said without a shadow of a doubt that a rhino was thundering in the undergrowth. Even the grunting sounds we heard aligned with the sound of a rhino. I looked at Angus and he looked at me. Our enigmatic expressions told it all. What the heck? We were both thinking. Then we saw them. There were two dark, tall creatures running into the woods, one after the other. When they reached the slight open clearing, where there was a sizable space between the trees, the two creatures began to fight. The way they were fighting would make Mike Tyson's performance look like a pathetic pussycat. This was some fight, where fists and legs were incorporated and thoroughly engaged. I was to realise in shock horror that these were two Bigfoots, both male. They looked completely different from each other, almost like they were altogether two unique species. I think one had the hair colour of orangutan, the face of an ape, but he was huge, his silhouette humanoid. The other was a silvery grey. I discerned the silver-grey Bigfoot had really kind, intelligent eyes, whereas the other Bigfoot looked more like an ape. He wore a murderous expression upon his face. His blazing red eyes were demoniacal, almost evil-looking. The two creatures were as polar opposite as chalk is to cheese. I am in absolutely no doubt that an encounter with the benign, benevolent creature would be pleasant, and an encounter with the ape-like one would be a very precarious encounter indeed, for he was scary, intimidating, downright nasty and vindictive. Suffice to say, the expression that eyes are the windows of the soul could not be more apt in this case, for the eyes of these Bigfoots really did reflect their temperaments and indeed their hearts. They fought together, and the air was infused with the most repugnant stench of sulphur that became more pronounced as they fought. The two creatures were growling at each other like very aggressive, truculent dogs. It was without question the kind of contemptible fight that left you in no doubt that this was a flagrant fight to the death. I remember saying a silent prayer for the silver Bigfoot, who I knew I liked. It was like he had an aura around him that really was beguiling. It was the ape-like humanoid that sent shivers of dread dancing down my spine like electric shocks. I truly did not like him. Finally, with one last mighty blow to the head, the gorilla-like creature finally slumped to the ground. He became lifeless. I guessed he was dead. For some unexplainable reason, both Angus and I clapped and cheered in delight with the outcome to this fight. It was such a spontaneous thing for us to do. I did not even think of the ramifications, but the silver Bigfoot glided towards us, nodded at us, as if thanking us for our applause. Then he glided away into the woods. Marcus and I were about to go and examine the deceased body. Then we heard some very substantial sounds that obviously were from another Bigfoot coming our way. We sensed it might be one of the ape-like humanoids coming to pick up his fallen comrade, so we made a quick and hasty escape. Needless to say, this incredulous event marked the eve of a long-standing friendship between me and Marcus. We are both exactly the same age. We discovered we were at school with each other in our junior years, in the same class. It's a small world indeed. We were both lonely heterosexual widows, both in love with our late wives. I suggested to Marcus, who is like a brother that I never had, that he move in with me to my Queen Anne home. I have to say the arrangements has suited us down to the ground, for at my age having companionship is what counts. As for Lily, I don't miss her at all. When I met up with her with Angus by my side at a restaurant in Seattle, Lily took one look at the two of us together, knowing her cover had been blown, and promptly disappeared from my life. I never heard from her ever again, but I recently learnt she was convicted of murdering her most recent husband, so finally the law caught up with her. She'll now be spending the rest of her life in prison. If I'm grateful for anything, it is that Lily brought a brother into my life, and a random opportunity to meet a Bigfoot. So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.